So we're here for the next part of this exciting series of videos looking at the armours from the effigies and brasses here in Lingfield at St Peter and St Paul's Church. Come and visit it if you can. And we're going to be looking at this incredible effigy. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria, and I'm again here with Dr. Tobias Capwell here in Lingfield in Surrey. So, Toby, tell us about what's special about this effigy.
All right, this is the third Sir Reginald Lord Cobham. He was actually a knight who fought at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. After that battle, he was given custody of the Duke of Orleans, who was one of the high-status prisoners taken at that battle. And then he lived for a few more decades and died in 1446. His effigy did not exist at the time of death. The effigy was made after death, which is a very useful thing to know from his will. And it shows us a gloriously rendered armor in very fine quality English alabaster. Alabaster is really the best material for carving armor on effigies, because it's impregnated with water when it comes out of the ground. So when it's newly quarried, it's really soft and easy to carve, but it's very, very fine grained, which means you can get really, really sharp detail. And then as it dries, it becomes glass hard. So it's really the perfect material for making something that's meant to last for eternity. I mean, you know, this is, you know, it's got bits of breakage here and there, but it's overall in a really amazing state of preservation.
So my understanding is, as far as effigies go, you've got other forms of stone which are cheaper, but effigies as a whole are more expensive than brasses. So they are, effigies are inherently quite high status. And alabaster is sort of second only to gilt. Gilt metal.
It's basically, for most real people, alabaster is as high status as it gets. Now there is, you know, you can go even further with, you know, gilt copper alloy.
Like the Earl of Warwick.
Right, but the Earl of Warwick is the only non-royal effigy who's got that. All of the other gilt copper alloy effigies are members of the royal family.
Which tells you a lot about the Earl of Warwick and his time.
Right. But for most people, a beautifully carved alabaster effigy is really as good as it gets, and as good as it needs to get. So
this is, you know, humble, you know, Lingfield is just essentially a small village now in Surrey, but this family, a branch of the Cobham family, were really, really important at the time. And we've seen that, you know, the previous Reginald, or the first Reginald, was essentially a sidekick of Edward III at the beginning of the 100 Years' War. Is this also Reginald? I can't remember.
This is Reginald de Cobham.
Another Reginald. So he was at the Battle of Agincourt, so later generation, Henry V's generation.
Grandson of the first Reginald.
Right. But this armour is not what he would have worn at Agincourt. This is a later period armour of what, about 1440?
1440. Between 1440, 1450. It's actually reasonably close to the time of death. But he was already a man in his 60s, and his military career was behind him. So very much like Richard Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick, you have the effigy of someone who died at quite an advanced age, and they're shown wearing armor that's really higher tech than they would have used in their heyday. So as an old man, he may have actually seen armor of this type. But it's not what he was wearing at Agincourt.
I guess it's like if you imagine someone at 80 years old dies and they were buried in a modern Lamborghini. That's not what they were driving back in their heyday in the 1980s. You know?
But this is a really important and unusual effigy if we take English effigies of the period as a whole, because almost exclusively, with only a small number of exceptions, fine quality English effigies like this show the domestic style of English armor of the period.
And does that suggest that the English armour is more expensive and higher status?
Yes. I mean, this is all something I've gone into a lot of detail in my Armour of the English Knight books, where
links down below.
Yeah, if you don't know, find out. The English bespoke armors made by the masters in London were very expensive, very high status. If you didn't have money for essentially Savile Row level armor, then you bought a less expensive continental import.
Usually Italian or Flemish.
Italian, Flemish, French. There's a lot of armor being made in Western Europe on the continent, and a lot being exported at lower prices than what London makers were able to produce.
We still pay too much even today.
Absolutely. This is a long, old English problem. But so because the continental armor tends to be cheaper and lower status, you tend only to see it, or the majority of depictions are on lower status monuments like the brasses. You don't see it as much on the high relief effigies because the people who could afford the effigies were of high enough status to afford the fine quality English armor with all the decoration and everything.
Right.
What we're seeing here is really not totally unique. This is one of a group of 4 effigies, all by the same sculptor, that survived from this precise decade. There are 2 at Canterbury Cathedral. There's another one at the Fitzalan Chapel at Arundel Castle, that all show French armor of the late 1430s, 1440s. Very, very specific. When you look overall kind of in general at this figure, when I was looking at it for the first time 20 years ago during my PhD, I thought, oh yeah, it's basically Italian, right? Because everything looks like Italian if you don't, unless you know otherwise. But this is very specifically a French armor. And there's a lot of different features you can point to that point in that direction.
I think just for anyone who doesn't know this period well, this is a period when we're in the 100 Years' War. Okay, so if we're talking obviously Agincourt was obviously between the English and French. But the important headline here is that a French armor, don't think of the modern boundaries of England and France, because of course big bits of France were under either English control or were allied with England.
Right.
There were close alliances between the English and the Burgundians, for example, at various times with Flanders and also with Brittany. So a French armor could come into English ownership through peaceful means, purely because there was so much interconnectivity between England and France.
They're going back and forth all the time.
They were not the modern, don't think of the modern countries, they were far more connected.
And let's remember, just in the immediate context of this effigy and the life of Sir Reginald Cobham, this is a period when Henry V had reconquered huge areas of Normandy and taken back a lot of the northern parts anyway of the old Angevin Empire, and reestablished a lot of those close affinities. People, members of the same family are in one side and the other side. English knights have territories in Normandy and in France and in Aquitaine, traditionally. So yeah, it's not enormously surprising, but at the same time, the French armor was evolving in a different context and under different pressures and along different lines than armor in England. The geography itself produces some of the reasons why. France has everybody traveling through it. France has a hugely close connection to Italy in this period, and to Iberia, and they're on the Mediterranean, and they're connected to the Low Countries and Burgundy, and it's a hugely international area, the heart of the medieval world. And the French nobility were historically very rich and very powerful. And they have the means to power an armor industry. And what you see on this effigy actually are a number of crucial French features.
Okay.
And we can say that because if we trace them back to their earliest appearances, they all trace back to French sources.
Okay.
For example, the bassinet, the great bassinet. This is another unusual one where instead of a jousting helm under his head, he's got his great bassinet for war. And there are a couple of different types of great bassinet. There are great bassinets in England, in Italy, in France. Everybody's using them, but there are regional differences. And the French developed a kind of great bassinet that's really closely fitted around the throat. The English ones tend to drop straight down more or less, and the Italian ones are quite similar. But the French really like this super waisted form in the neck, which means you can't just drop it onto the head like a helm. It has to have the facility to open up to accept the wearer's head.
Which we can see down the side here.
It's on a pivot. This whole front swings open. You put it on and then close it up.
So it's very similar to my Frederick the Victorious style.
Yeah, well, the Frederick the Victorious armor is an Italian's idea of the French style.
Yeah.
They're copying an earlier French style. And you see, for example, this narrow little chin plate. There's like a chin plate here that just eases the interaction as the visor comes down. That appears first on French great bassinets, and then the Italians are like, hey, we can make some money selling armor to the French. So they create the Italian armor alla francese in the French style, and they put that same narrow chin plate on because that's part of what the French like.
And it's very similar to the ones shown in René d'Anjou's tournament
Exactly.
book. Yeah,
exactly so.
Very much the same family, isn't it?
So this is the French model for the Frederick the Victorious armor. The Frederick the Victorious armor was only made 10 or even a fewer years after Sir Reginald Cobham died. So it's all kind of contemporary, essentially. But there's a surviving example of this typology in Paris, in the Musée de l'Armée. It's in my book. This is all, the continental stuff is all in the third English Knight book.
Which is highly recommended, by the way. It's a very good book.
And it dates from the 1430s, 1440-ish, something like that. But it compares in so many ways, you know, very precisely to this helm. Even here, if you look closely, you can see that the strap that straps the thing down to his back plate is mounted on the inside of the plate, not the outside. Same thing at Paris.
Great. So there's some other features which lead you to believe this is French. So
another thing is the very particular construction of the arm and shoulder defense, and most particularly the way the shoulder and arm assemblies interact. And you know, the English, as we've seen elsewhere, they usually until they changed their minds in the 1430s somewhere or something, they tended to just cover the shoulder with an assembly of articulated plates that just kind of extended the upper arm. It wasn't a separate thing at all. By this point, the shoulder is a separate assembly. On a lot of people, most people would just bring the lowest plate of the shoulder down to overlap the arm and then strap it over the inside of the arm. Here, there's a very specific thing going on where the upper cannon, the upper part of the vambrace itself, is quite short. And there are surviving Italian examples that have those quite short upper cannons. But here, this is a quite a short upper cannon, and this whole section here is an extension of the shoulder assembly, and it's fully enclosed. So the upper arm is tied up somewhere in here, and then you have this whole thing that comes down and embraces it, and forms a kind of socketed turning joint.
It's a tube, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a turning joint.
The bottom one is, yeah.
And it's wrestling with this kind of mobility, this rotation at the elbow, because this is limited by where your points are for your upper arm. If the points are down low and it's a little short cannon, it doesn't give you too much trouble. But the higher this goes, the further away the point is from the point of rotation, the more constriction you start to get. And you're starting to really fight the twisting action of the arming doublet underneath. So they're trying to free up that arm mobility, that rotational arm mobility. And that's a very specific construction. So I think to myself, where are we seeing this? What's the earliest evidence for this? What are the earliest depictions? How far back can we push this to determine who came up with it and where did it come from? And this is in French sources on French effigies circa 1400.
Wow.
And nowhere else. So it follows that this is a French idea. And if you follow French armor more generally and you try to get your head around what's their attitude to armor, what are they trying to achieve, what do they like? The French in the first half of the 15th century, they want to put plates where other people don't put plates.
Like the croissant.
Right, like putting articulated plates in the underarm, putting articulated plates on the inside of the arm, articulated plates at the back of the leg. The French are putting articulated plates where nobody else does because they want that more, they want to push the technology towards covering the entire body with an articulated carapace. Like here, look how the plates go up the sides of the neck. That's very, very unusual and very distinctive. And it's there so that you have a good, clean interaction with the neck plate of the great bassinet. There's no funny gap there between the great bassinet and the shoulder defense. It's just a continuous, plated assembly. And the great bassinet goes down. It's out here somewhere. There's a great interaction. There's no gaps. That's the French thing. Look, you notice also that, kind of like the English, French and English are connected in lots of ways, and they're paying close attention to what each other is doing.
And killing each other.
And killing each other, but then trying to learn each other's tricks. Yeah. Most of the French fought on foot at Agincourt, just like the English. Yeah. They've got a longer cuirass skirt too. That's 5 wide plates. When on an Italian armor, you'd probably have 4 narrow ones in the front and 3 in the back. And then the Italians would extend that with tassets. Here, there's no side tassets like an Italian armor. The fore tassets are much smaller because they're having to cover less because of the longer fold.
And quite a similar size and proportion to the Frederick the Victorious armor again.
Right.
Which overall, with the symmetrical...
It's the Italian version of this.
Yeah.
He also has a hind tasset. You can see a bit of it on the other side. Right, okay. He has a big hind tasset in the back, but no side tassets. Okay. So you're starting to see how we've got a catalog of things here that are totally different than the way Italians do it. It's also, he's got 2 articulation lames above the elbow and 2 below. Usually, almost in most cases, the Italians only use 1 lame on the top, on the knees and the elbows. This might seem a little train spottery and a little
But that's what we're here for.
But that's why we're here. But that's also where the meaning is.
Yeah.
You start cataloging all of these differences, and what you end up with is saying, well, it's not very much like an Italian armor technically, and they're doing a lot of different things decoratively, really. So if it's not Italian artistically and it's not Italian technically, then maybe it's not Italian, right? Another thing, here, look at this. Look at this.
It could, just to throw this out there, but could it be Italian made for export market? Could it be like the Messiah?
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
I don't think so. Because if you compare, Frederick the Victorious is.
Yes.
And Frederick the Victorious is still different in all kinds of ways from this.
It still has more Italian
It's a foreign
DNA.
Idea of French rather than the French originator.
I think also looking at the shape of the cuirass, it still has a slightly more sort of rounded above and rounded below the waist, whereas the French and English seem to be a little bit more slender, should we say, than the Italian.
Yeah. And the Frederick the Victorious cuirass is still built like an Italian cuirass. They've put 1 or 2 extra lames on the skirt, but the skirt is still hanging off the placard. Whereas this skirt, more in the Western European Anglo-French style, the skirt is a separate assembly. You can see where the breastplate is coming down very sharply and overlapping a waist lame that's going up underneath.
So the skirt is coming up and has a sort of lip that goes inside.
All over this, there are fundamental differences in philosophy on how to actually build the thing.
I know that there's no real evidence of any German connections with armours in England at this time, but one interesting thing to me is that the Kastenbrust style that often you have the separate cast and brushed skirt that comes up, and they sometimes have a sort of peg and a loop inside.
Right, they pin it.
Yeah.
The English don't seem to do that. The English ones seem to work just on the fit of the plates, and they're fully enclosed back and front. Whereas a lot of those German ones, they only have a skirt in the front.
Yes.
Or they have no skirts at all.
They have the sort of padded pleated thing at the back, don't they?
The Waffenrock. Yeah. So I'm not saying that they were totally unaware of what the Germans were doing, and in my new book, which we talk about later, I've sort of meditated on the conceptual similarities that there sometimes seem to be between what the English are doing and what some Germans are doing. But even then, they're doing it in different ways. And you can come up with basically the same idea kind of independently. And just because something looks superficially similar at first glance doesn't mean that it isn't going to turn into something very different.
Sure, yeah. So you think this is French. Are there any other clues to do with, I mean, if we look at the sabotons, there's a clue there, isn't there, with the overlapping of the plates? Maybe?
Yeah, but before we get to the sabotons, I would, in passing, point out the gauntlets.
Mittens.
I mean, it's very, very rare to see gauntlets of any kind shown on an effigy when they're not being worn.
Yeah.
So here they're strapped up and looped over the dagger. The dagger's grip has been broken off.
So they literally have a leather strap, and you can see little rivets on the inside of the cast.
And this is something you see if you start looking for it. You see it.
It's in art, isn't it?
They sling it over the sword hilt. They sling it over the dagger hilt. Yeah. It makes sense.
Because what do you do? What do you do with your gauntlets if you were taking them off? And it's I mean, I actually need to do something like this myself, because I'm often like, where have I put my gauntlets?
and these are fully fledged, honest to goodness mitten gauntlets. They don't have little finger plates inside. The main mitten plates cover the whole finger. They are philosophically very specific, and they are again not what the Italians are making generally. I've talked about it in the books where there may have been some gray area there where the Italian or otherwise armor exporters came up with forms of gauntlets that were simplified and that were just easier to get to work for whoever ends up with them. So instead of going through all the trouble of sewing in a lining glove, they just put a couple of straps in there. You can stick your bare hand in there and it'll work fine.
And that's shown in art as well.
It is. But it's, again, it's the Italians catering for something that's really happening in Western Europe. And those are a really rare, wonderful three-dimensional depiction of French gauntlets of the 1440s.
They're a gorgeous shape, and they have some parallels to some of the gauntlets we see in René Danjou's tournament book again, from an overall sort of shape.
But I mean, nowhere else do you get this sort of. You've got some early fluting going on here, which perfectly mirrors the metacarpal tendons. They come out to the knuckles, and then you get these wonderful flutes following the line of the fingers. Nobody else does that. We've not seen that anywhere else.
They're gorgeous gauntlets, and I've always found these gauntlets interesting because that fluting isn't really echoed on the armour.
Right.
So.
Right.
What that means, I don't know, but
I mean, you've got a bit on the knees and things.
Yeah. Also worth mentioning as well that the knee wings completely mirror the elbow wings. So what we talked about formerly, now the legs and the arms are very much in harmony, aren't they? They look.
Yeah, absolutely. And also another French feature that you don't see anywhere else is what's going on with the upper leg. Now you've got the front cuisse plate here, which is a single plate of steel, and then you've got a side plate, okay? Most people are familiar with armor. That's nothing unusual. What's the big deal with the side plate, right? The big deal is that if you look inside elsewhere, there's a line of rivets showing that there's a big leather strap going around the back of the leg, but then there's a steel plate here with two buckles. So what you've got is the strap coming around the inside. It's got this floating plate that's like a giant wide strap end that then straps onto the outside of the leg. Very distinctive. It's not anything anybody else is doing. You know, the Italians and the Germans, they have side plates, but they hinge them on the outside and then just strap them more typically around. To have this plate that moves around the outside of the leg and fastens on the outside, there's just nothing like it. But hey, if you look at the French sources, going back to like 1370 at least, there it is.
And I think a lot of people have the idea that arm and leg armour, you always have hinges on the outside and buckles and straps on the inside to protect them. Well, here we've got a great example of the buckles and the straps being on the outside.
But so it's not the impact of any one feature, but you start totaling up everything you see on this armor, and it adds up to a really strong, non-English, non-Italian, but distinctly French character.
There we go. And one of the details I love about this harness is these raised, sort of rolled, probably rolled edges around the tassets. And we see it echoed up here at the top of the placard, which presumably would have been strapped, although there is what looks like there was an element up there which probably...
It looks like it was strapped, but it's like an applied piece that's broken off. You see that in a couple of places on this armor.
Another sort of humanizing detail I love. I mean, I love the pudding bowl haircut as well. I have thought about getting a wig so I can go full Plantagenet when I'm reenacting.
I'm sure the internet would love that.
I need to get one. But I love the fact that they put the rings on the fingers. On every single finger, in fact, has got a ring at a different height.
And medieval people like to wear rings on their thumbs. They also wear rings on around the secondary knuckle, not just down on the finger like we think of. They wear them up here. You see that? I've even found examples on English effigies where they're wearing rings over their gauntlet fingers.
Yes, yeah.
It's pretty, I mean, how cool is that, right?
Very cool.
Now, there's one further level to this.
Right.
All right? And it's the Bessigues.
Yes.
The Bessigues are weird.
They look like little pavises.
Well, that's what I thought at first.
Right.
I thought, yes, they look like little pavises, and there's plenty of other evidence that shows that that late medieval people liked making their reinforcing plates look like little shields.
Yeah.
You know, echoing their function with their form.
Yeah.
So sometimes you get reinforcing plates on the shoulders or even the gauntlets that are shaped like little horseman's shields.
With the little
and they
cutout.
even have the boosh on them, right? And it's just cool.
It's a shield,
you know?
so make it the shape of a shield. Yeah.
And there are English brasses that show Bessigues that clearly are meant to look like pavises. They're quite long, and they have a wide flat ridge running down the middle, just like a typical pavise. And these look a bit like pavises, except that they've got a bivalve shape on the top edge. They've got these two lobes on the top edge, and these very characteristic 4 rivets. You don't need 4 rivets to attach a Bessigue, right? And what's with this weird bivalve form? And to me, this looks really, really distinctly like an adarga.
A Spanish Moorish
The
shield.
classic Spanish light cavalry shield, originating with the Moors, but very rapidly during the Reconquista, adopted by the European Castilians and Spanish generally.
So these rivets could only be there to make it look more like a shield.
Well, the adarga
because the N-arms
distinctly has these 4 rivets in a square. And it's got the bivalve shape that you almost never see anywhere else. I mean, sometimes like Spanish knightly shields sometimes have the bivalve form just because they're echoing the aesthetic. But so that you look at that and you think, hang on a minute, I've just gone through all the reasons why this is a French armor. So, and we've talked about how the French are under heavy Italian influence and how they're taking some essential Italian technology and then moving it in other ways. So you could say this is a French armor, perhaps made under some Italian influence, made originally for the Iberian market, but ends up on an Englishman. How far-fetched is that?
It's an enigma. What do you think? Yeah. And so, as mentioned with the Sabatons, they actually overlap upwards, which might be another piece of evidence that this isn't an English armour, it's a continental armour.
In this period and through most of the 15th century, the English overlapped their Sabaton plates downwards.
Towards the toe.
And, Whereas continentally, and we know this from surviving examples as well, the continental Sabatons tend to overlap the other way. Later in the 15th century, the English do sometimes start doing it the other way, but it's still a minority. So that's yet another addition to the catalog of features that contribute to a sense of this as a West continental armor.
Yeah, and I love the detail that the strap is almost exactly in the same place as on the other, much earlier effigy, of sort of under the ball of the feet. So it's quite consistent. And there's another strap down here, which is where the spurs are attached. So, you know, that hopefully gives you a different angle of this effigy. And speaking personally, I absolutely love great bassinets, and I hadn't realised until I came and looked at this one closely that as well as these rectangular breadths, if we call them that, although they're just as useful for seeing through as they are for breathing through, we've got these slits above the line, above this sort of midline here, which gives it a slightly more, I think it's a slightly more humanizing look, isn't it? When you have, you might just say, well, why don't you just put those holes all over the thing? And some helmets do have that. But I think the idea of having vision slits, it gives you a slightly different visual effect when you're looking through it, but it also makes it look more like a human.
Or it's looking at you.
Yeah, or maybe it's more intimidating as well, I don't know. But I think it's a really lovely, while the back of the bassinet is very rounded and the chin's fairly rounded, it's got a bit of a prow at the front there. The front of the visor is actually really quite angular, so it has a little bit of a hint of later close helmets and armets and things like that. And in case you're wondering, because I know someone will ask, that head there is a crest, so that would have been originally probably painted, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it is. It has surviving bits of paint on it.
Yeah, so that would have been unpainted, and that is one of the Cobham things, is it's a Moor's head or a Saracen's head, and it's on basically all of the helmet crests.
Very common pub name, the Saracen's Head.
The Saracen's Head,
yeah, that's where it comes from.
Right, okay.
Another family, the De La Poles in Suffolk, also have a Moor's Head crest, and the pub across the street, until recently, was called the Saracen's Head. They've changed it to the Wingfield Arms because it's politically sensitive now. But that's what that is, if anybody's wondering.
Anyway, Toby, thank you so much for that. I hope you've enjoyed that. Any questions you've got, queries, we can come back, we can revisit this. This is not too far away from where I live, so I can even come back and get more footage of it as well, hopefully in future. But it's been wonderful going through this with you. It's given me personally a lot more insight into this effigy than I have before. So thank you very much, Toby.
All right.
Check out all the links down below to Toby's books and various other things, and I'll see you back for the next part, or just for another video on the channel really soon. Thanks, Toby. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.